Hey, welcome. Today we're going to be detectives, really. We're diving into a really puzzling and honestly pretty dramatic shift in the mental health of young people. Using some fascinating population-level data, we're going to try to figure out what on earth happened to an entire generation in the 21st century.
So let's start by looking at the evidence, because the data itself reveals a huge mystery. This isn't a story about some slow, gradual change. It's more like a storm that just appeared, almost out of nowhere.
Okay, take a look at this. For most of the 2000s, you can see that rates of major depression among American teenagers were, well, they were pretty stable. But then, right around 2012, bam, something happens. The line just shoots upward, creating this hockey stick shape that you see. And you'll notice it's especially steep for girls.
And here's the crucial thing. The sheer scale of this change is staggering. We're talking about a 150% increase. Let that sink in. In just about a decade, major depression became 2.5 times more common for teens. This wasn't a gentle wave, it was a tidal wave.
Now, this brings up a really important question. One you might be asking yourself right now. Is this increase real, or is it just that we're all talking about mental health more openly these days? And you know what? That's a great question. It's totally possible this is just about reduced stigma, which is something we always have to consider when we look at public health data like this.
So let's really dig into that idea. To figure out if this is just a contagion of awareness, we have to look for evidence that goes beyond what people say they're feeling. We need to look at hard behavioral data.
So on one hand, yes, reduced stigma is absolutely a factor. More people feel comfortable reporting their symptoms, and that is a very, very good thing. But it just can't be the whole story. Because when we look at that hard data, at actions, not just words, we see that something much more profound was changing under the surface.
And this chart, wow, this really tells the story. See, these aren't survey answers. These are actual hospital emergency room visits for self-harm among kids as young as 10 to 14. This is a concrete, tragic action. And look at the timeline. In that exact same period we've been talking about, the rate for young girls nearly tripled. The behaviors changed right along with the self-reports.
Okay, so the hard data shows the increase in distress is absolutely real. But before we start hunting for a cause, there's one more really important sociological idea we need to talk about, and that's medicalization. This is basically the process where normal, even if they're really difficult, parts of life get reframed as medical problems. I mean, think about being a teenager. It's always been a messy, turbulent time of change, anxiety, and feeling insecure, right?
And as the sociologist Jam Stolzer points out here, there's been this push to convince all of us that these totally normal, if painful, experiences are actually symptoms of a mental illness. Now, this doesn't mean the suffering isn't real. It is. But it does mean we have to be really thoughtful about how we label the natural ups and downs of just growing up.
So, we've established we have a real, verifiable increase in suffering, even if this idea of medicalization is also playing a role. So if it's not just talking about it more, what's causing it? Okay, let's play detective and start ruling out some of the usual suspects.
First up, what about the economy? A lot of people point to the 2008 financial crisis, but the timing is just all wrong. As you can see here, as the U.S. economy actually recovered and unemployment went down all through the 2010s, teen depression rates just kept going up and up. The two trends are literally moving in opposite directions. So it's probably not the economy.
All right, so what about other very real anxieties? Things like climate change, school shootings, political division. I mean, these are all incredibly serious stressors, no question. But as the main culprit, they have a couple of big problems. They don't really explain the specific timing of that spike in the early 2010s, and, crucially, they don't explain why we see this exact same pattern happening in Canada, in the UK, and across Scandinavia all at the same time.
So after ruling out these other suspects, our investigation can start to zoom in on one massive, global phenomenon that actually fits the timeline, the demographics, and all that international data perfectly.
Let's just look at this timeline. Between, say, 2010 and 2015, childhood was fundamentally rewired. It went from being a thing that was mostly play-based and in-person to being phone-based and remote. This was the exact window of the mass adoption of smartphones, high-speed internet, and, this is key, social media platforms built for your phone.
And the result? Well, by 2022, nearly half of American teens said they were online almost constantly. I mean, that is a profound transformation of how humans relate to each other. It really marks the end of one kind of childhood and the birth of a totally new one.
So, with this new prime suspect in mind, this complete rewiring of our social lives, let's go back to that first piece of evidence we looked at.
When you put the timeline of this great rewiring right next to the data on teen mental health, the correlation is just stunning. It's really the only theory we've looked at that explains the timing, the international scope, and why girls, especially younger girls, seem to have been hit the hardest.
So what happened here was basically a massive, uncontrolled experiment on an entire generation. We took a childhood of physical play and face-to-face interaction, and we replaced it with one lived through a screen. But what were the specific harms of this new, phone-based childhood? How did it do the damage?
So if this great rewiring is the cause, we really need to understand the mechanism. How did it cause this harm? In your reading, the author, Jonathan Haidt, argues that this new phone-based childhood caused 4 specific, foundational harms to young people. So as you read, I want you to think about this. What do you think those 4 harms are, and how did they work together to create the crisis we're seeing in the data?